Hello learners, Dr. Paul here with a video summary for Unit 2. And in this unit, we talk about Murray Bowen's natural systems approach. Bowen, you should be aware, has been and continues to be one of the leading figures in the family therapy field. He was one of the original pioneers who spent a lot of time doing therapy with families with somebody diagnosed with schizophrenia. And Bowen set out to do something very ambitious. He was interested in an all-encompassing systems theory that could be used and applied to families in particular to help explain mental health symptoms and mental health diagnosis from a more systemic, non-linear, non-individual perspective. So you have to realize in the 1950s when he was doing this work, along with other pioneers of family therapy in different parts of the country and different parts of the world, this was a radical idea. At the time, therapy was immersed in the ideas of Freud and Jung and humanistic psychology to some degree, but these were all individual pathology oriented approaches. And Bowen was among early theorists who, Bowen himself, I believe, was a psychiatrist. And because he was looking at families and he was treating families, he was ostracized by many in the psychiatric community. Like many of the early family therapists, not only was he ostracized, but I believe he was kicked out of many professional associations because it was seen as rather heretic to look beyond working with an individual one-on-one and to actually include family members in the process. So in many ways, what Freud is to psychoanalytic theory, Bowen is to family therapy. What attracts many family therapists to Bowen's ideas is his focus on intergenerational dynamics and including the ideas about patterns, triangles, and that behavior among family members can be linked to the various patterns that go on in the family of origin. In this respect, there's some similarities with Freud because Freud was also interested in a person's early childhood relationships, but for Bowen, he was much more interested in how the system impacted the individual, not so much how an individual became pathological because of the symptom. Or because of the system. So that's really where the similarity ends, because systems theory offers a very different explanation for psychiatric problems. And in family therapy, there are different branches of systems theory. So Bowen is most closely associated with natural systems. And as we'll go on in this semester and in various other courses in the program, you'll learn about cybernetic systems, which informs very different approaches to family therapy. So for now, we're looking at Bowen, and I think it's important to recognize that, like many of the early family therapists, the pathology shifted from the individual to the larger family system. And so that was quite a leap and quite a shift. But it's important to keep in mind that we were still looking at pathology. We just moved it from the individual to the family, and the family became the pathological unit, if you will. So a radical idea at the time again, but still within the world of symptomatology and deficits. So you're hearing me talk in these summaries a bit about the difference or the distinction between deficit models and strength-based approaches. And again, just as a reminder, in general, a deficit model of therapy is one that uses language that supposes that people are lacking something. So, for example, in Bowen's work, people were said to have lacked differentiation from their family of origin. When you lack differentiation, that is a deficit phrase or a deficit way of understanding people. Just like if you lack self-esteem, or if we would say that a couple lacks communication skills. Now, these are all very different ideas to the way most of us speak about therapeutic problems, because for many of us, talking about a communication problem or lacking communication skills is something that we would say in everyday life. They lack communication skills, or this person lacks self-esteem. As therapists, we want to begin to deconstruct those labels and take a closer look at them to see, are they valuable in therapy, or are there more empowering ways to talk about people that don't include all the deficit language. But for now, in talking about Bowen, this is, although it is more systemic than the world of individual pathology, it still has language that houses it or places it in more of the deficit-based approaches. So pathological triangles is another example of pathological language from a Bowenian perspective. From a Bowenian perspective, the problem is not the problem. What is focused on are much more broader patterns in the family of origin. And so whatever symptom people are coming in with, whether it was drug abuse or anxiety or depression, the symptom was less important than the context that the person was raised in and is currently in today. And so the work of therapy was much more about patterns in the family of origin, gaining insight into those patterns, helping people understand where they came from more. So in many respects, the therapist role from this perspective, and we're going to see that change from approach to approach, but in this approach, the therapist is very much an expert, a coach, an educator, and that's all fair game from a Bowenian perspective. And many therapists feel comfortable in the role of a coach or an educator, if you will. But there are, and we'll talk about other approaches that suppose the role of the therapist in very different ways. From a Bowenian perspective, we are much more interested in health equals being rational, being logical. And if you are overly emotional, that was seen as rather pathological from a Bowenian perspective. As you can imagine, although he is a very popular figure in our field even to this day, and many family therapists associate themselves as Bowenian therapists, from this perspective, clients need to learn a new language. And as we get into more strength-based approaches, we'll see that they take a very different take on whether we should be teaching clients a new language or we should be learning the client's language. And so from this perspective, we teach clients about triangles and patterns and differentiation and multi-generational transmission processes, etc. As I mentioned, from this perspective, emotions are pathological, and rather a healthy person is seen as somebody who can be logical and rational in the face of conflict. And from this perspective, blame is too easily placed on the family of origin. And so the family can oftentimes feel like they're blamed from a Bowenian perspective. So let's keep in mind that as we talk about different approaches to therapy, it's not about which is right and which is wrong. And it's also not about which is going to be the best one for the clients that I'm working with. Again, that's more of a medical model understanding of different approaches to therapy. There are valuable aspects to various approaches to therapy, and we encourage you in this program to try on different approaches, read more about the ones that resonate with you. When you begin field work, begin practicing in a model, but don't think of it as which one is right and which one is wrong, or which one is better or which one is worse. Again, the model of choice is not necessarily the engine that drives therapy. I know as beginning therapists, it's very tempting to think that the model of therapy is the most important thing. And it can be an important guide, but it is certainly not the engine that drives therapy. And that's something that becomes clearer the more you do therapy. But the engine has much more to do with relationship building skills and being to connect deeply with clients. And much more to say about that. So some general comments. As I have mentioned before, this is a very lively group. There's been some great discussions. Just to keep in mind, APA format, you're expected to be integrating references into the body of your posting, but don't overuse the literature so that I can't hear your voice. Provide a reference list at the end of your posting. You should not be using websites in general, but more professional references, either textbooks, book chapters, etc., journal articles. The due dates for initial postings is Wednesday at midnight. That's Central Time. That's for initial postings. and then peer responses are due by Sunday of the week, midnight Central Time as well. So just post a response that you were able to view this video, and possibly one takeaway or something that it sparked in you, whether it's a follow-up question or comment, and I look forward to seeing you in the next unit.